Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you come in, please hit the like button. I really appreciate that. Um, the first part of the special just went off. Obviously, this is about Janet Jackson, her career, her life. Watching her go from a young girl from Gary, Indiana, obviously in the footsteps of her more famous brothers. Well, you could say brother, and five other brothers as well. But of course, we're talking about the legendary Michael Jackson. But as we see, Janet Jackson would become an icon in her own right, especially once she took control of her career back in the mid 80s. Because as if you did see the entire film, it did show that at the very beginning, well, I won't say at the beginning, mind you, it was more actually the early 80s. She was trying to find her niche as a performer, as a singer anyway. Obviously, she already had the Jacksons variety shows in the late 70s. In the early 80s, she had done some acting, obviously, in Good Times as Little Penny. And as we know, of course, a lot of us were introduced to child abuse. I know for myself, that was the first time I saw that really on television, was watching her play Little Penny on Good Times. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that was the fourth or fifth season of Good Times. I know by then, obviously, James had left. Florida Evans had left the show as well. And Good Times had centered mainly around JJ, Thelma, and Michael. And Willona became much more than a family friend because obviously by then the mother and father dynamic was gone. And she actually was more of a, wasn't quite a mother figure because by then they had all grown. But of course, that was a Little Penny brought another dynamic to Good Times. And again, that was the first time that I know that I was introduced to abuse, so to speak, on television. And of course, she would also make other appearances on Different Strokes. If you remember, she played Charlene, which was Todd Bridges' girlfriend. But Janet Jackson was definitely doing her thing in the 80s. But she was still in the shadow of Michael and the Jacksons. By then, they were no longer the Jackson 5, of course. And if you remember, if you're a person of a certain age, if you're 50 plus, you know that we literally grew up on Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5, and later on the Jacksons. And in fact, for those who don't know, the reason that the name was changed from the Jackson 5 to the Jacksons was the Jackson 5, that name was considered intellectual property of Motown. And they were transitioning. They had left Motown Records in the late 70s, early 80s. And also another part of that was Jermaine Jackson had stayed with Motown. So the group dynamic had totally changed because if you remember back in the day, Jermaine Jackson, he was the second lead singer. Michael did most of the lead singing, obviously, for the Jackson 5, but Jermaine Jackson would also sing some lead in some of the Jackson 5 songs. And of course, if you remember Daddy's Home being really the biggest song that Jermaine Jackson would do for the Jackson 5. So out was Jermaine, and in came Randy. So there was still the five brothers dynamic. But again, they were no longer considered the Jackson 5. They were the Jacksons. So that's why the name change. And of course, they would do their variety shows. And as you saw also, Janet and Randy would perform in Vegas. And of course, being little, and Vegas was totally different back then. I mean, Las Vegas in the 70s and early 80s, man, it was almost like it was a bigger version of Times Square back in the 70s and early 80s. But I think that's another chapter in another book, so to speak. But yeah, it was crazy watching this documentary and hearing it from her own words. And I like the way that all of the family, for the most part, was included. We saw Tito Jackson. We saw Randy. I mean, we saw literally all of the Jacksons. And it was good to see Revue Jackson as well. People forget that at one time, all of the Jacksons literally had a hit in the 80s. I remember Revue Jackson had a major hit that was in the top 10 called Centipede. And yeah, she sold millions of albums as well. But yeah, the Jacksons, listen, again, if you're my age and older, we all grew up on the Jacksons, the Jackson 5. And I'm pretty sure all of us have their favorite Jackson songs or Jackson 5 songs. See, it's crazy. Now you have, I mean, you basically have, okay, your favorite Jackson 5 songs, your favorite Jackson songs, your favorite Michael Jackson songs. You could have your favorite Jermaine Jackson songs, because Jermaine Jackson also had a lot of hits in the 80s as well. And of course, you have your favorite Janet Jackson songs. And I do like the fact that they did document that she did have a problem. She had to basically break loose to gain control of her career from Joe Jackson, because he had a direction that he wanted to go in. But as Janet told you, I see you, Native Gavite. How's everything, brother? She had to break loose. She had to gain control of her career, hence the album Control, which came out in 1986. And it was huge. And I love the fact that she gave the proper credit to Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Because believe me, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis changed the direction of Janet Jackson's career. I mean, if you heard the songs that were being played in her documentary, I mean, let's face it, they were pretty garbage, man. I mean, I remember when she did Fame. And in fact, it seemed like they really didn't know what to do with her on that show. And you saw Debbie Allen, how she broke it down, where Janet was shy. Like, you could tell that she had talent, but they hadn't really extracted all the talent out of her. And I remember that one of the songs that she did, it was called Dream Street. That was total garbage, man. But Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis gave her career a direction. I mean, it wasn't just following the blueprint of the Minneapolis sound, which, let's face it, in the mid 80s, that was one of the dominant sounds in music at that time. And I love the fact that they broke that. Jimmy and Terry was talking about the fact that they were in Flight Time Records, and if in fact That was the original name of the group. They were not always known as The Time. They were known as Flight Time. And the original lead singer was not Morris Day. In fact, Morris Day was the drummer on the original Flight Time. The original lead singer of Flight Time was Alexander O'Neal, but he got fired from that because he liked a little too much sniffles, so to speak. So Alexander O'Neal had to go. Not only that, excuse me, he and Prince did not get along. That's what really got fired. But just hold on 1 second. I'll be right back. Oh, God. I'm back, ladies and gentlemen. I had to quench my thirst there, ladies and gentlemen. Please forgive me for that. I don't want to keep choking online here. But I tell you, Janet Jackson, it was crazy. I mean, it sort of took me back to my my teenage years watching the Control album in '86. Obviously, Rhythm Nation, which in my opinion was her best album. And they're going to get into part 2, which will be tomorrow night. This is actually, they call it a 4-part series. It's really a 2-part series. And obviously, you know that they all grew up in Gary, Indiana. Anybody who really doesn't know about Gary, Indiana, listen, Gary, Indiana, man, that is, I mean, you talk about the ghetto. That is the ghetto for real. Gary, Indiana, even today, there's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of crime. I mean, Gary, Indiana, when you talk about the 10 most dangerous cities per square mile in the United States, it is still down there, so to speak, as far as that is concerned. I mean, it ranks right down there. I mean, everybody, they used to talk, and they still do a little bit. Everybody talks about Chicago, how dangerous it is. Listen, some of the most dangerous cities in America, Chicago's not even close. New York's not even close. I mean, when you talk about dangerous cities, you talk about Columbus, Ohio, really, the Gary, Indianas. A lot of the Midwest cities are so much more. East St. Louis, that's a dangerous city. Obviously, Baltimore is pretty dangerous. Listen, there's a lot of cities, man, that, listen, New York, L.A., Chicago, they don't even touch those cities. I remember even D.C. Used to be down there. Gary, Indiana is not an easy place to raise a family. And Joe and Catherine Jackson did an incredible job. And I love that fact also, that they brought out the fact that, excuse me just a moment, you know, certain things just pop up on the computer sometimes. They get in the way. And I love the fact that Janet and her siblings gave the proper credit to Joseph Jackson. I mean, was he strict? Absolutely. But he gave those young men and women a drive, a work ethic, and he made them great performers. He made them successful as men and women. And as we all know, ladies and gentlemen, a two-parent household makes a huge difference in a child's life. And we see that with Joe Jackson. Now, one of the worst things I've ever seen was when Joe Jackson passed away, and a lot of people are not going to bring this up, but I definitely will. If you remember when Joe Jackson passed away, Bette Midler was disgusting. I mean, basically saying that the world's a better place without him. I mean, she was so disrespectful, Bette Midler. I mean, trust me, she would have never said that about any other person, especially any other race of a person. We know that the only reason she spoke that spicy was because he was a strong black man who actually was around to raise his children. Now, did he do everything perfect? Absolutely not. But it certainly was not Bette Midler's place to down this man and basically throw dirt and disrespect his name. Not after how he was as a father. And you see the results of his hard work, of both of their hard work. Not just Joseph Jackson, but of course, Katherine Jackson, who was also the backbone of that family as well. And she's still very much alive. And as you can see, Janet adores her. I mean, the whole family adores Miss Katherine Jackson. Excuse me. But anyway, that the Control album opened a lot of doors. It really reintroduced Janet Jackson to the world. You saw Paula Abdul as well. And if you remember, she was the choreographer for the Lakers back in the day. And she became Janet's choreographer for Control. And as we know, she became a star in her own right, putting out albums in the late 80s. Paula Abdul was a huge star, as we know. But it was a beautiful walk down memory lane with Janet Jackson. And it'll be interesting to see how they do the second part. And one of the things about Lifetime, they edit certain things to make it look a certain way. She never spoke badly about Michael Jackson. Now, what she did say was things had gotten a lot weirder and a lot stranger when it came to after Thriller. But if you remember, at that time, that's when Michael had broken away from Joe Jackson. In fact, he was really the first to do. No, I'm wrong. Jermaine was the very first to do so, but Michael was the first to do so on a grand scale. In fact, if you remember, he had left Arista Records first because the Jacksons went from Motown to Arista Records, and then Michael Jackson went to Epic Records, which was part of Sony Records. And that's where Thriller came out. In fact, Off the Wall had first came out and then Thriller. Now, a lot of people will say that Thriller was Michael Jackson's greatest album. I disagree. Off the Wall, in my opinion, was the better album. I know Thriller sold more and was the bigger album, but without Off the Wall, there's no Thriller. And that's where he had all of those number one hits. That's like if you're a Prince fan, many people will say that Purple Rain was his best album. But in my opinion, without 1999, you don't get Purple Rain. And in my opinion, Sign of the Times was Prince's best album, but I digress. We're obviously talking about Janet Jackson and, to a lesser extent, the Jacksons in general. Now, in my opinion, Rhythm Nation 1814 was her best album. And listen, she had other great albums after that, and she's had no doubt a wonderful career. But we are going to see how her career, because of Justin Timberlake, took a nosedive, and it was disgusting because it took him about 12 years to apologize, so to speak. He never gave a true apology. If anything, he let Janet Jackson twist in the wind during that Super Bowl famous malfunction, so to speak. He took no responsibility, and Janet Jackson's career took an absolute nosedive after that. In fact, that was the halftime of the Carolina Panther New England Patriots Super Bowl. I remember that very clearly. And it was very sad to watch that. And in fact, for a while, she was actually banned from the Super Bowl like it was her fault. That was an absolute disgrace. But that's going to come up tomorrow night, and I will review that as well. But I tell you what is your favorite Janet Jackson song, and what is your favorite Janet Jackson album? You can leave that in the comment section if you like. Thank you so much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. UncClaude signing out. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Take care and God bless. And we'll do this again tomorrow, and probably even to a greater extent. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Native Gabite, and thanks to everybody who joined me this evening. Take care, everybody.